So I just wanted to start by just acknowledging some of the work of these women. I just wanted to say that, obviously when it comes to breast cancer is not a disease that doesn't have a public profile. There is so much advocacy that's been done for so many decades on behalf of patients with breast cancer. But for a long time, women with metastatic breast cancer were kind of on the margins of this advocacy and visibility. And that's a problem, right? Because all of you folks watching this know that metastatic breast cancer patients have different needs and priorities than women with early stage disease in a lot of cases. And so these 5 women are some of the folks who've really been at the forefront of an effort to bring the metastatic voice into the conversation in a really central way. And as a journalist who's covered this and written a lot about it, I can tell you that the advocacy community is making a difference in terms of what folks are paying attention to, where money is being allocated, and it's really quite remarkable. And so I really wanted to start with Alicia, who's been in this fight and been an advocate and a really effective one for a long time. And Alicia, as Kathy mentioned, is extremely active on social media and has really helped organize folks around various online platforms. And here we are in another online platform. So I thought it's a perfect place to begin. So Alicia, I wondered if you could just tell us a little bit about what you think has changed and what's kind of been happening in the metastatic advocacy community and with the effort, particularly in the last couple of years, because there has been a lot of change recently. You've been around for a while, around this topic for a long time. How would you kind of explain what's happened in the last, 5 years or so with advocacy for this community and why? What is making a difference and what has changed?
Sure. Thank you very much, Kate, for the introduction. And thank you to Kathy for inviting me to participate today. And big hugs to all my fellow panelists here. First, I'm quite honored to be here speaking as an advocate in the breast cancer space. While I've had 2 diagnoses of breast cancer in the early stage window, if you will. Being a member of the BCSM community for almost, it's coming up on 9 years now, almost 10 years, has really taught me that there's a need for advocates of all stages of disease to really work together and collaborate and sort of be fearless friends for the metastatic community in ways that I don't think we had even thought about even 5 years ago. Twitter has changed dramatically since I first joined in 2008. And with the advent of BCSM in 2011, Jody Shoger, who was one of the co-founders who has passed away from metastatic breast cancer, we wanted to find a space where advocates from all backgrounds, all stages could come together and learn to be better advocates and learn how to be better collaborators in this space, because what we saw was a very fractured environment. And I really think over the last 5 years in particular, and unfortunately, Jody hasn't been here to see the progress, but I have just been in awe of the metastatic community, how they have come together as friends, colleagues, advocates, and really work to change the conversation around what it means to deal with metastatic breast cancer and how to advocate for metastatic breast cancer. And I think that the metastatic community in particular is really growing into its own in a way that I'm very happy to see. And if BCSM has been a small part of that, then I feel like I've been able to contribute. So I do stand as a fearless friend for metastatic breast cancer and try to do whatever I can to elevate the voice of the community and give them the platform that they need to really make some change. And I feel like this core group of metastatic advocates that have really come together and are sort of pushing the needle, pushing things forward in ways that I didn't think were possible even 5 years ago. So we're starting to see much more recognition at big breast cancer conferences, at other cancer conferences like ASCO. You're starting to see a recognition for the need for listening and truly collaborating with the metastatic community. So.
Thanks, Alicia.
Sure.
Yeah, really, really well said. I wondered, so we had a planning call, to talk about the conversation we'd have here today. And one of the things that a number of people pointed out is that there are all different kinds of advocacy, and that's beyond metastatic, but in the metastatic
Absolutely.
breast cancer space, in particular, there's advocating for yourself, advocating in and for your community, legislative advocacy. And I think one of the most, Alicia, you talked about visibility and awareness and kind of getting voices in, but there's also a really important effort underway with scientific advocacy and advocacy
Absolutely.
around research. And Christine, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about sort of why that's really important. What are the unique challenges, advocating for a pie that's only so big, and thinking about metastatic patients, but also clinical trials and all of those types of issues. Tell me about sort of where you see research advocacy for metastatic breast cancer patients, and what are your goals, and sort of like what's the work left to be done. So I've just thrown like 20 questions at you, so you can choose maybe 3 or 4 of those to touch on. But I think that scientific and research advocacy is so important and really also very interesting. So talk to us a little bit about that.
It's fine to ask 20 questions. I usually have about 20 projects going on in my head anyway. So I think that, I kind of stepped into the research advocacy because I was looking for resources when I was diagnosed in 2015. I was really looking for resources that could tell me what drugs were in the pipeline, what kind of trials I might qualify for. And I really wanted, more of a science resource, and I couldn't find many. And so I just started my own website, and that was how I started the Stormwriters, stormwriters.org. And there I host my own clinical trial database. And I didn't think it was going to be anything. I thought it was going to be just for me. And it's gotten a lot of attention, which I'm very happy about. But it sort of pushed me more into research advocacy because I realized, okay, so if I'm the only one doing this, there's a lot of other people out here that can, and I do have a science background, but I don't think you need a science background to be a research advocate. So from there, I co-founded a program called GRASP, which stands for Guiding Researchers and Advocates to Scientific Partnerships. And the idea there is to bring advocates and researchers together for a conversation, for a poster walkthrough at scientific conferences. We just wrapped up our ASCO GRASP session, all virtual, which was completely new for us. So we are trying to adapt in this time of COVID. But one of the positive things that I think have come out of this is that we realize that having a virtual session allows so many more advocates to participate. So we are giving access to people who otherwise wouldn't be able to attend these conferences. So I think that I will be, my co-founder, Julia Malice, also a metastatic breast cancer patient, also a Hear My Voice grad. We think that now what we're going to do is offer both in-person sessions when those resume, and then virtual sessions anyway, regardless of COVID. So this is kind of how we decided to adapt to it. But and for the future, I hope that I would love to see more research advocacy training programs, more opportunities that advocates can meet scientists and meet researchers, because I really believe that when the patient advocates are involved, they drive better research. Did I answer all 20 of your questions, Kate?
All 20, perfect. We had a request in the Q&A just to clarify what BCSM is. So the hashtag BCSM stands for breast cancer social media. So if you are tweeting about breast cancer or breast cancer advocacy and you throw that hashtag on there, a lot of people will see it. I have a tweet deck devoted to BCSM, a feed just to look at the hashtag and what has that hashtag on it. So BCSM, breast cancer social media. And yeah, Christine, I think you raised a really good point, which is because of COVID, we are all learning how to do many things virtually. And, for a lot of metastatic breast cancer patients, traveling to conferences and to, venues can be difficult financially, can be difficult from a health perspective. So, maybe this will open doors in the future. Hopefully we can actually get back together with one another at some point. But, kind of opening doors and thinking about what might be different in the future. Okay, so one other thing I wanted to mention is, the metastatic breast cancer community is many communities in one, right? And different, communities are affected differently, young and old. Socioeconomic status has an impact, and race is one of the sort of ways in which we can think more specifically about the needs of patients and sort of how to tailor things to groups and address issues that are important to different groups. And so Natalia, as someone who works with the Latinx community and is really committed to advocating for and to that community, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how is your work different? And what are sort of the specific challenges within the community that you speak to and on behalf of?
Hi. First of all, thank you for having me today here and giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Latino community. At the beginning in 2013, when I was diagnosed as an early stager, I was really lost. In translation, I knew a lot about cancer, sadly, because it runs a lot in my family. But I was still looking for, more information, more things that will help me to navigate through the diagnosis. And 1.5 years after I finished my treatment, I became metastatic. That was 2015, with rare metastasis in my ovaries. It's not, very common in metastatic patients. And it was discovered because I kept complaining about something that I thought it was not normal, and nobody listened. They were telling me by the time I got diagnosed that I didn't have no insurance. So they kept telling me things like, oh, when you have insurance, you might be referred to this and that, or there's nothing we can do for you right now. But I kept telling the doctor, this is not right, this is not right. I was bleeding like nonstop. So fortunately, I got approved after a long battle with Medicaid, disability, and stuff like that. I got approved for the compassion, whatever, for metastatic patients. And that's how they did a prophylactic hysterectomy. And that's how they found that I was metastatic to my ovaries and pelvis. So right after that, I was thinking, this cannot be happening. I mean, what happened if I didn't have some medical knowledge, because I'm a medical assistant, and I kept complaining about, doctor, this is not right, doctor, this is not right. What happened to one person that has no tools, that has no information, that is, is lost, and they take whatever the doctor tells them. Add to that people don't speak English. Most of the people here, there is a lot of Hispanic community here in Florida, especially where I live in Kissimmee. I have been moving, and I have seen it growing in the last 10, 11 years. And then they go to the doctor, and whatever doctor says, they take. But, they don't get any type of education about the treatment they are getting. They don't ask questions because they don't know what to do. They don't know what to ask. They don't have anybody there to ask. And don't forget, doctors are really busy, and they only give you 10 to 15 minutes to answer the questions. Then there is the other issue, you don't have insurance. If you come here and you are in the process, the immigration process or whatever process you are, you don't have insurance until 5 years have passed. So what did you do? Where did you go? So I was looking for something to help me out, to figure the whole thing out, and I found LBBC. Unfortunately, they gave me the voice that I was looking inside of me, that I knew that I had, but I didn't know, what to do with it. And it has helped me to educate the Hispanic community. I'm part of the leadership program, the alumni program with Hear My Voice. I'm very proud of it. Everything I am today in the cancer community is because of LBBC. And also, all the amazing friends and sisters and help us to navigate through all our diagnoses, bad news, death, everything. I have been seeing people still dying at the same rate. I get engaged with the helpline, and I'm very concerned about, the poor education that the Hispanic community has regarding metastatic breast cancer. They don't even know what treatment they are, what type of cancer they are facing. nothing. So I'm trying to give them my voice, to let them know they should advocate for themselves, how to do it, and pushing some of the organizations to have more material in Spanish, because we really need it. LBBC is one of the few that you can go, yo hablo español, so you can go to that, I speak Spanish, and you can click on that, and there's a lot of resources that have been translated, and I have been showing in radio shows, in TV shows, and all the, I'm not making any scientific research, but I have been going through a lot of social media and TV, radio, trying to get the Hispanic community involved to, get their treatment on their own hands, and start from there, starting advocating for themselves.
Thanks, Natalia. Gosh, you have what a lot on your plate, right? So in addition to all of the issues, anyone, working with metastatic breast cancer patients, you bring up some super important issues: immigration status, insurance problems, just money in general. Yes, we're so glad you're here with us.
There's a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot.
Financial issues.
We had a question in the Q&A about sort of what is the value and why is it important for the question is, how can people in this, oh no, sorry, that's a different one. So I think that Kathy is posting responses on, folks are asking, how do I get involved with all these organizations that you're mentioning? So in the speaker bios for the programs, the organizations are mentioned and linked, I believe. And Kathy can correct me if I'm wrong about that. So one question that also came through the Q&A, and then we'll get back to everyone, but was, what are the ways that metastatic breast cancer advocates can work with other disease states? So where are there opportunities for collaboration and kind of working together? And Alicia, you touched on this at the beginning, but Kelly, I wanted to kind of get to you and ask you a little bit about that too. So what are the ways metastatic breast cancer advocates can work with other disease states? And then I'd love to bring it back to kind of COVID and health disparities and a lot of these things that feel really newsy, but are just super present regardless of the time period and the work that you do. So Kelly.
Thank you, Kate. There are so many ways that we can get involved. One is, and not everybody can attend meetings, but attending meetings like ASCO, which is all cancer types. So that's the first place that I think I became involved with advocates from other cancer types. There are also opportunities through other organizations. There's an organization called Bag It, which makes up bags of information for people with breast cancer, but they have started a retreat for any person involved in cancer advocacy, whether it's a person living with cancer, whether it is an organization, whether it's pharma. And that's actually where I met Alicia in person. And it's open to all people. And, unfortunately, I wasn't able to go to the retreat this year, but it's another way to meet folks and collaborate. Also Twitter. So there are other cancer communities on Twitter. Lung cancer is hashtag LCSM. Brain tumor is hashtag BTSM. Gynecologic cancer is hashtag GYNCSM. So I've met a lot of people that way, and we have been able to collaborate. There's a group that's being formed right now with Stacey Tianov, who lives about 2.5, 3 hours from me, that I only see at conferences out of state. And we've started this group of pan-cancer advocates in order to collaborate, and to collaborate working specifically on clinical trials. And I will find the link to the form and post it in the chat box if I can manage to listen and do things across 2 devices, and I'll try to put that in the chat box. But we all have to work together. We are stronger together. We are smarter together. And we are only going to solve the problems of cancer if we work together across cancer types, between people living with disease and the clinicians and the researchers who are working on the disease.
Yeah, I've had a lot of people bring up to me this idea of working across even cancer types, right? Like you mentioned, what can sort of metastatic patients in one community do to raise the profile you folks in a different community that is not as high profile as breast cancer, for example. It's a really, really good point. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about COVID too, because I think it's in the title of this panel. And as we were kind of putting it together post, the in-person session in Philadelphia, we thought, well, this is the elephant in the room. How could we not discuss this? So we mentioned, one way that COVID has impacted your work now and perhaps things in the future, right, with virtual meeting spaces and things like that. But Jamil, you brought up a couple of other things in our planning session that I thought were really interesting. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what impact COVID has had on the work that you do specifically. And I know that you do a lot of advocacy work on behalf of Black women and in that space. So can you talk a little bit about the intersections between your work and what people have learned, what COVID has exposed in terms of disparities? Can you talk a little bit about COVID's impact on your work and the issues that you think about and work on?
Thanks, Kate. So I think what's been interesting about the pandemic is that it actually has enabled me to do less talking, as far as explaining disparities and structural racism and implicit bias. I think for a long time, we've known that Black women and, are dying at a higher rate than their white counterparts, and other ethnicities are also impacted. But I think we've gotten into a comfortable complacency as to thinking that it's only due to lack of access to, insurance or social economic factors, or categorizing Black patients as non-compliant or problematic, or, but when we think about now, we understand that disparities there is a lot, of course, that's caused by, social determinants of health. That is definitely true. And I think COVID-19 has really demonstrated this, and it has made my job a lot easier explaining, the history and the different contributing factors. But I think this also gives us an opportunity to see well, how could we be more innovative and more targeted about the solutions that we're proposing and how we allocate resources? And so I think that I always say, don't waste a good crisis. And so this opportunity has said, okay, well, how can we think outside the box and really be focused on how we can address the barriers and challenges that are, making Black people get off track if they're impacted by breast cancer and all these other issues, just like COVID-19. So if you think about in Philadelphia, for instance, they created a task force to really bring coronavirus testing to the community, to beef up education and go to the community so that they could get trusted information and resources and education. And so I'm always thinking, well, we can take a lot of those same lessons and observations that we have with COVID and now apply that to Black breast cancer. And I say Black breast cancer because I do think that in order to really be innovative and treat it, in order to stop the disparities and the deaths at the rates that we're seeing that are so egregious, to really think about how do we treat Black breast cancer specifically, and be targeted about what resources, what challenges, what barriers do we need to address, and think about it, let's really be evidence-based with how we're allocating resources and how are we, structuring a lot of the new programs that we have, so.
Yeah, thanks, Jamil. Yeah, we had a comment in the chat that COVID in a lot of ways has been good for the cancer community, which is an odd thing to say, right? And I hope this part doesn't get cut out of the entire battle. Yeah. I'm
getting calls now from folks that I talked to a year ago, and they're like, I get it now, and I have to say that, LBBC has gotten it for a while, so they've already been kind of ahead of the forefront and in front of everybody else doing this work and thinking outside the box. And I've had to do more nudging and pushing with other organizations to say, no, status quo is not acceptable anymore. In particular, Black women are in crisis. And if we really want to stop the deaths, let's do something about it. Let's not think that we can just apply the same, tried and old solutions and sweep all these widespread brushes, and think that it's going to speak to these issues. We really have to be targeted and focused and use evidence and data, because we've studied this to death. We know what to do.
So what do we do? So let's move to that too. So I would love to. Some questions are coming in from the Q&A, which is great, and I'll get to those right after this. But can you? I'd love to just ponder this for a second while I say it. What are the main priorities? What are the main things that need to be done yesterday? So obviously, there's so much work to do in this space. But Christine, for example, if you were to choose, what's the most important thing in the research and scientific space, or more broadly, I know you do lots of other work too. What is like a number one, or what are the top one or two real priorities that you see moving forward? So we have a hashtag now. We have all these organizations. We have so many people joining conferences like this. But what are the concrete, like Jamil is talking about, the real action and real things that you'd like to see happen soon?
That's a great question. And if I had to pick one thing, I think I would have to say that we really need to address the health disparities. I think Jamil and Natalia very eloquently explained the challenges in these communities. And I have actually taken a pledge, and my pledge is that I will not participate in any panel or talk or campaign or anything that I get asked to do without a person of color represented. And usually when I say person of color, this is a Black patient advocate. Because we know that, as Jamil mentioned, these women are dying at higher rates. Yep. And they don't have the same access. And it's the same in Natalia's community as well. So I just feel that if I want to really be a true ally or accomplice, which is a word that I've learned, is when you get your hands dirty and you're actually in the thick of it. If I really want to make a change, I'm going to have to give up some of my privilege. And I've had to say no to some really interesting panels that would have gotten me really great connections with researchers and oncologists. But, I can't be the only person representing the voice of all metastatic patients. It's just not fair. And frankly, it's too much pressure. So, I just think that I think if we want to, at least I'm really speaking to my white colleagues and friends, that like this is something that we can do to make a change, is to actually give a voice to people of color. So that for me is a really big priority. It's kind of threaded throughout all of my projects that I work on. So I'm sure there are other priorities that I'm missing, but that's for me the big one.
And Kelly, do you have a top priority or something that you're really thinking about as something that the metastatic breast cancer advocacy community needs to fight for right now?
As Christine said, we have to fight for all people who are affected by breast cancer. And the Black population, male and female, dies 40% higher rate than whites, who in turn die at a higher rate than other racial and ethnic groups. So as a board member of Metaviver, Jamil is also a board member, we have pledged to diversify our board, and we are really going to work this year for our 2021 request for applications, because we've already gotten the ones for 2020, and we are one of the few organizations that is still funding research this year. Not as much probably as last year, but we're still going to fund research. But for 2021, at least part of our research focus will be to ask for research on Black breast cancer, on the inequities and disparities in cancer research, because we have to address it. We have to address it from the systemic reasons why people of color die, why Black people die at a higher rate. We need to look at the differences in the cancer itself. We clearly need research. We know that the disparities exist, but we need research that's going to focus on how to fix it. Treatments, support, access to care. How can we fix this? And yes, Liz Johnson, I just saw your comment there. This is through Metaviver. LBBC does amazing work in this area. Komen has a lot of work that they've been doing for years addressing health inequities. And I call upon other organizations like BCRF to also fund research into the inequities and disparities in Black breast cancer. We need to do better. We can do better. We will do better. And we, again, will do it by working together and making sure that everything we do reflects the population that is being served.
Well said, Kelly. Yeah, and it's wonderful to, Jamil, never let a crisis go to waste. To be able to leverage this moment in some way to make improvements in this space would be incredible. So there's a question from the Q&A. It's not one that Kathy has sent to me, but I see it here. And this is the question. I feel like when I was working on my book, I interviewed a lot of metastatic patients, and they would always say, like, how do we get the word out more? Can you help us? And that's not really my role as a journalist, but I mean, it is, but I'm not, I'm not in PR. I've been, storytelling and things like that. So I try to do my part by telling the stories of patients. But this is a really fundamental question, I think. How do we educate not just healthcare providers, not just those who sit on boards that allocate funding, but how do you folks work? It's really important also just that there's more public awareness just among the general public about what metastatic breast cancer is, about how it's different from early stage breast cancer. And this is a frustration I heard so much, particularly from advocates. And so Twitter and hashtags and funding and these kinds of conferences are helpful. But I would love to know who might be interested in talking a little bit about that challenge of just educating the public. I'm sure many of you have conversations constantly where you're answering very basic questions that people might ask, which shows that we need more. Awareness is a word that is very charged in the breast cancer community, but when it comes to metastatic breast cancer, it does seem like there's a need for a lot more awareness. So what about this idea of pulling the public in and making sure that people understand what this diagnosis means and why it needs funding and things like that? Alicia, I'd love to come back to you on that.
Yeah, sure.
That tip. Yeah.
This is a great question, and people ask this question to the BCSM community all the time. How do we continue to raise awareness around metastatic breast cancer issues? And some people that have been in the metastatic community for some time now think, well, we don't necessarily need more awareness, or but we do. Awareness has to be a continual activity, because what I've come to realize in moderating the breast cancer social media community for now almost 9 years, is there new people are coming into these communities all the time. And we have advocates that come into BCSM all the time that are literally on their taking their first steps into advocacy. So we have to recognize that this is a very cyclical kind of process that has to be continual. We have to always provide a foundational element of awareness around metastatic breast cancer, and we have to make sure that we're doing it in a data-driven way where we're constantly talking about what the latest numbers are in the metastatic community. And I wish I could say that we see the numbers improve or the numbers go down at a faster rate, but unfortunately they're not. So we have to stay invested in awareness. Awareness will never go away as an aspect of our advocacy. And I think that that's the hardest part, even for me personally, is I thought, well, when I hit a certain level of awareness, but everybody's got that same level of awareness. And it's not the case. We have to make sure that we are, as advocates, we are constantly turning around, offering our hand to the next generation of advocates that are coming in, and providing that level of awareness and education that they need to bring them up to speed as quickly as possible. So for me, my role is a sort of quote unquote old guard advocate in the breast cancer social media community is I need to now elevate the next generation of advocates. It's my job, it's inherent on me to help the next generation of advocates learn as much as they can, as quickly as they can, so they can hit the ground running. And I feel like if that's the only thing that I can do to help the community, then I'm going to do that 100% and make sure that every single advocate that steps into this community, the metastatic breast cancer community, the breast cancer social media community, has the education and awareness that they need to be confident, well-educated voices for the community. And so it's incumbent on us to elevate the new voices, the voices of of all different backgrounds, of all different generations, to keep going in this direction. That's the only way that we can make true change, fundamental change, is recognizing that this is a cyclical process, and it's on us to make sure that we're educating and elevating the next generation of advocates.
Yeah, and a number of people pointed out in the chat, it's not just awareness, also education, right? Those
Everything.
things go together,
Yep.
not like,
hand in hand.
you know, right, not just metastatic breast cancer exists,
Yep.
but, you know. And we also have a question on the chat from Tatiana Prowell, who I'm guessing all of you or most of you may know. Tatiana is a breast cancer oncologist at Johns Hopkins and also a regulator with the FDA. So she has kind of she wears two hats. And she asked a good question, and I think I'm certainly guilty of what she's bringing up, which is, she says, I'm curious to have the panel reflect on the use of metastatic patients as a phrase. She says, I've been campaigning hard, as many on this chat know, to eliminate conflation of patients with their disease. You know, patients don't metastasize, their tumors do. So I'm curious, what do you think about sort of labels and language? So, you know, if we say metastatic patient, is it better to say a person with metastatic disease? Is that have both a benefit to the person being spoken about, but also in a public messaging kind of way? You know, especially when you're doing advocacy, language is so important. Some of these choices that seem small, but can really have a lot of ripple effects. And Natalia, do you have any thoughts on that, or do you make a conscious effort to sort of think about your language and specific phrasing? And you're doing it in two languages at the same time, I recognize as well. But I think it's an interesting question, especially coming from Dr. Prowell.
Yeah, in the Latino community, people don't even know the meaning of metastatic breast cancer, even in Spanish or English. When you say, when they ask you what stage you at, or they ask you, are you okay, right? You finished, because they don't ask you remission or anything like that. And I am like, no, I'm stage 4. Oh, that means that you are good now. That's a good thing. Some people tell me that. Some people tell me like, oh, and it's like the hurricanes, that you are like a stage 4 and then you can go back to stage 1. People have no idea. That's in Spanish, right? Then when we talk like the general conversations, and we want to address the awareness, and we want to address the advocacy, and we want to address education, I think the word metastatic patients is, I don't know if you guys agree, but it's a way that we have to put a difference between people with early stage breast cancer and us. Metastatic breast cancer is not just a stage, it's a disease per se, because it has some other conditions, and once you're metastatic, you cannot go back to anything, and then you develop a lot of conditions that aren't even metastatic breast cancer, but you develop like fibromyalgia, you develop stomach conditions, you develop a lot of things that are treated separated. So I think that the way we just name us metastatic patients define very good what we are. I know it's the tumors are metastasized, but with the tumors, I guess we do too, because we develop a lot of other things with the metastasizing of the tumors. So I just don't see why we should change the phrasing, or I don't know what you guys think, but to me,
it reminds me of, like, I think the first breast cancer conference I went to, I remember going to a panel, and it was the first time I heard a presenter say that the patient failed therapy instead of and I was like, what? Because of course a therapy fails the patient, right? Or fails to work. And so I think getting, patient voices more toward the center of the conversation is ways in which, we sensitize people to these things and make researchers and others who do public presentations in particular think a lot about this. Okay, so, and I wanted to also ask, we're getting some questions from folks who are joining from abroad, which is really cool. And so there's one, the name is not right in front of me right now, but a viewer from Australia who said, I'm in awe of how far ahead you guys are. in the US with your advocacy on behalf of this community. And I wondered what advice you folks might offer to those who are in other countries interested in, who don't have as robust perhaps an advocacy community. Jamil, is this something you've thought about, or do you kind of communicate with folks in other places, or what you're kind of new to advocacy, and not new to advocacy, but this particular brand of advocacy a couple of years. What do you wish you had known kind of going in at the beginning, and what advice do you have to others interested in doing this work?
My advice would be innovative and consider yourself a disruptor, and don't think that anyone in the room is more intelligent than you. I find that what I can say, I am a newbie to the advocacy world. I was diagnosed 2 years ago, but what I always found so surprising is that when I'm sharing these ideas and we're moving forward with things that just seem so clear and apparent to me, and these are the experts, these are the researchers, and when I'm doing a DoD review and we're just having these back and forth and discussions, and we're talking about, okay, how do we move forward and what are we going to do? I just find it so surprising all the time where a lot of these ideas have not been thought of before. And some of it, I think, is just due to kind of comfortable complacency. We've been doing this. We had this funding for this. We're just going to keep doing that. Not really studying whether or not the outcomes that you're expecting to see are really, being impacted by what you're pushing forward. So I really say to new advocates, do not think that anyone there is more intelligent than you. They learn so much more from you if you're open, talk about your own personal experiences, talk about what you're seeing, in the patient setting and in the clinical setting, because I also find that a lot of folks work in silos. And so I look at, my advocacy is very multi-layered. So depending on what room I'm in and who I'm able to influence at the time, that's how I'm going to push the agenda forward. And so I think about, when people are working in silos, they're just thinking about their own viewpoint. And so I think one thing that's been refreshing about me is that I work with all organizations and I connect them all together, and we're like, okay, how can we move this along? This isn't about being cliquish. This isn't about, oh, well, we don't work with this organization or that organization. No, we're all focused on one goal: to stop the dying from breast cancer. And so what do we need to do? Understanding based off of our role in the breast cancer community, what do we need to do? And so I even work with the American Cancer Society. That's not just about breast cancer, but with their resources, they can put up a lot of effort and structure all this funding to go towards what needs to happen. And I think evidence-based data, collaborating together, having a nationwide task force, in particular when it comes to metastatic breast cancer and Black breast cancer. And I also think that we have to learn from HIV and AIDS. Nobody in HIV and AIDS was like, let's just find it early. Let's just nuke it to death. Let's not ever get to metastatic. And so when I meet early stagers and I, coach them too, you could be metastatic. You just don't know. So how about we focus on what's causing the deaths? And I was really, really encouraged, with a lot of the new research proposals that are coming out and a lot of the new structures that are in place, that people are now thinking about metastasis and stopping that. Instead of thinking about, well, let's, screen early and find it early. That's great, but that's not going to stop you from dying if it, comes back and it metastasizes. So I think data, evidence, research, constantly thinking outside the box. Do not think that anybody is more intelligent than you are. And me personally, if you are establishing structures, support resources, depending on where money goes and it's impacting Black bodies, you need to have Black bodies at the table.
Be a disruptor. That's Jamil's. Don't be afraid to be a disruptor. Okay, and data, and work with other groups, and and yeah, I mean, I think particularly with the disparities between Black women and non-Black women in breast cancer, it's not like these are new revelations, right? This has been known for a long time. So there's been a lot of talk about it, but not a lot of change. So how to translate that into something more tangible. And then I'm sure that one of the things that this was such a learning experience for me was just how active and energetic all of you ladies are who work in this space. And I imagine there are some folks watching this thinking like, I don't know if I can do all of that. Like, do I have sort of the energy to take on this other, I've got, maybe kids and work and my, disease, and then also on top of it, this other thing. So we talked in our kind of planning call about kind of the spectrum of advocacy, that there are different ways to make a difference. And Kelly, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about sort of what are the different ways to be an advocate. And for someone watching this, who maybe has a particular skill set like Christine or Jamil, like, or Natalia or Alicia, like any of you folks, but then there might be some folks saying, I want to make a difference, I want to do something, but I don't know how to plug in at that level. So can you talk a little bit about the different ways to be an advocate?
Thanks, Kate. I'm looking, there are 127 participants in this session right now. Guess what? All 127 of you are advocates because you're learning. The first time you go to your doctor and say, why are you recommending this treatment? Guess what? You're an advocate. You're an advocate for yourself. Mm-hmm. So all of us are advocates. So you can get involved with an organization. You can get involved with LBBC. LBBC's Hear My Voice program, even though Kathy wouldn't let me do it, is one of the best ways to learn about becoming an advocate in this space. If you are really interested in science and reviewing grants, Komen's Advocates in Science is another great way to do it. Research Advocacy Network has a whole little training program on the science behind research advocacy. You can contact me through Metaviver or info@metaviver.org if you want to help review Metaviver grants. You can get involved with the Department of Defense Breast Cancer Research Program, which takes a lot of time, but it is so cool because we have a seat at the table and can influence the direction of research. If you were that PTA mom that raised money for metastatic breast cancer research, raise money for organizations like LBBC. If you are a policy wonk, write to your elected representatives and tell them that Stage 4 needs more, that we need the Metastatic Breast Cancer Access to Care Act passed. There is a place in advocacy for every single one of us. We are all different. Every single one of us has unique strengths that we can bring to the table. And I say this all the time, I put it in the chat. We are stronger together, we are smarter together, and we are more powerful together.
And just one more, to add, somebody said in the planning call, start a Twitter feed, or amplify the voices of others, which is one of the cool things about social media. So we have a bunch of questions specifically about what organizations to get involved with. And I think that LBBC will follow up with this in giving more specific resources. And again, there's a lot on the conference website as well, included in also the bios of the speakers for today's chat. So we only have a couple of minutes left. So I wondered if we could just talk a little bit about, I want to end on a positive note. What Kelly said was like so inspiring, but I'm curious just to be real and real talk, because we need that. What are sort of some of the barriers and the challenges to doing this work? So can we kind of go around quickly and just talk about that just for a couple minutes each? I think that would be fantastic, just so people are prepared to do the work that you folks are talking about. Christine.
So the first thing I was going to say when you said where are the challenges, well, you don't get paid. So that's probably
right.
the biggest challenge. And there are a lot of scholarship programs out there. I think we can probably follow up. I know people have been asking about all these things, and they will pay your way to get to conferences and things like that. So, we can make sure that we mention all of these, but that is a very big challenge. And a lot of advocates have to work full time, so they don't have time to go to conferences. So I don't really have a good answer for it. I just know that this is a big challenge. And, but I think that this is a point. I saw somebody said, sometimes the advocacy programs are very limited, maybe by age, or maybe they're just limited in general because they can't accept so many people. I encourage you to, when you see a disparity, address it. Like if you want to connect with somebody at LBBC to discuss creating more programs, if you want to talk to San Antonio, the breast cancer symposium that has the Alamo advocacy program there, this is where you can, this is called advocacy. That's what you do, is you can say, hey, wait a second, why is registration not free for this conference? I'm an advocate. So, you know, I need to get access to this information. And I can tell you with COVID, I have seen a lot of discounts and even free registration. So, and they can see how it's actually giving people more access. So I think that, you know, there are other ways to get around the not being paid problem, but it is a challenge.
Yeah, I think that's real talk, right? And one thing that a lot of you folks I know have advocated for is more scholarships, more funding for people to be able to travel. Kelly talks a lot about that on social media as well. Alicia, biggest challenges to advocacy, to becoming an advocate or doing the work?
I think just the misconception that to be an advocate, you have to be a fundraiser. So I know that Kelly just touched on this a little bit, but I think it's worth mentioning one more time that advocacy comes in all sorts, all shapes and sizes, all flavors. And, you know, I think people that step into advocacy for the first time, they sort of come out of the gate thinking we're going to raise so much money, it's just going to take care of all of our problems. And I think I found very early on that money is not necessarily the answer. It's making sure that you've got these collaborative research networks and community connections in place to effectively use the money that some of these organizations are fundraising. So everybody has a skill set that they can bring to the table. You might not be an expert fundraiser, but you might really know how to, you might be an excellent writer, or you might have a finance background that would be better suited to helping an organization sort of become a lean and mean advocacy machine. So, you know, don't think that you don't have a skill set that can be utilized in this space, and don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of becoming an advocate, or you'll find an energy that you never knew existed when you sort of tap into the skill set in the right community. So it will happen naturally, and just have the courage to take that first step forward. That's all you need.
Thanks, Alicia. And Natalia, biggest challenges to advocacy, or what would you say to the advocates of tomorrow?
Well, yeah, the advocates of tomorrow, the challenge is when you don't have the energy. People think that you can do a lot, but sometimes we're sick, sometimes we just don't feel good. And the advocacy starts advocating for yourself. Mm-hmm. If you're not a good advocate for yourself, you cannot advocate for others. So you have to make sure that you're good so you can advocate for other people. But besides that, we had an amazing friend. She was in the leadership program at BBC, and she sadly passed from metastatic breast cancer. But she always said it doesn't have to be big to be meaningful or to have a big impact. You can do small things. You can call your representative. You can hashtag stage 4 needs more, or this and that in social media if you just have a little time, and with that you are helping a lot to spread the word of what you need. There are a lot of campaigns in Facebook where you can raise money on your birthday. You can do that too. Mm-hmm. I mean, social media has been an amazing tool for us as advocates, when you cannot be present in some places, like when people go to DC, but it can, like, you still can be present in social media.
Okay, great. I think that so there are so many questions in the chat, and Kathy, I know, is responding to a lot of them. Hi, Kathy. And we have to leave it there. So it's 12 o'clock. So we've gotten to the end of our hour, and I just want to say thank you so much to everyone for sharing all these resources and your voice with this larger community. And thanks a lot for having me as well to moderate and talk to you folks, some of whom I only know from Twitter. So it's really wonderful to see your faces as well.